All right, welcome guys to another episode of That Danish Guy. Joined with me again for the fifth time, 5 times in a row. Victor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me once again for the fifth time.
For the fifth time. Um, so I wanted to get your take on something that happened over the last few days. And Gina Carano was fired from the show The Mandalorian, and so a lot of people, as you can tell, I'm a huge fan of both The Mandalorian and Star Wars in general. I'm not gonna show you, but like my whole shelf over here is like filled with Star Wars stuff, which is still very cool, especially when you're 35, as I am. Uh, so listen, she was let go from the show The Mandalorian, and this is in spite the fact that she is considered a fan favorite by a lot of people. And she was let go because obviously I think most people and most of you guys will know by now that she made what some people have called some controversial posts on social media, and that ended up they Disney ended up letting her go because of those posts. I found them for you guys here in case you don't know exactly what she said, because there's been a lot of confusion about this whole subject. There's been a lot of outrage, as there is about a lot of things when it comes to social issues. So I thought it would be a good idea to kind of get your take on it, and also to just look at the posts and see what we're actually dealing with. Were the posts as bad as people say they were, or were they not? Have you heard about this? Yeah, I know you talked a little bit about it before. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I heard about it before. I read the Guardian regularly, and as you'll know, and for those who don't know, on the right column they have the most popular articles of the day, and this one popped up there, and I attempted to resist the urge to read it, but I caved and I read it. In part, I didn't want to read it because I'm not interested in. I know it's not entirely um, pop culture celebrity news. It's a bit broader than that, but generally
Yeah,
I don't want to read that kind of stuff. And secondly, I knew from the title I knew exactly what it was about. I didn't really need to know the details to kind of know the gist of the story.
yeah,
Um my initial take is just kind of that I don't really care, to be entirely honest. I there's this is a drop in the ocean, right? Like I'm interested about the storms, and I understand. So that's personally, right?
yeah.
Personally, I can we can talk about it, and I'm definitely I can definitely I we can talk about the broader implications of firing someone because of their political opinion. We can definitely have a conversation about that.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that's
and
the
I,
important conversation to have.
Yeah, and I understand from the perspective of someone else, I entirely understand why they care. From my own, this is personally only my unique, only just me, just my personal opinion is, I think there are more important things to spend your time on. But we talk about this often. We talk about free rights. We talk about freedom of speech. We talk about the political divide in the U.S. And so, for that reason, I do think it is relevant to talk about this because it is an exemplification of the divide between the right and the left, and it speaks to a sense of persecution that the right feels. And whether that
Yeah.
is correct or not, that's the feeling at the moment.
I was talking with someone about this whole issue of the division between the right and the left, and I think the reason that if you're on the right, you feel like the grasp on what you can say and express is tightening, is that these social media companies are, as we've often talked about, they're leaning to
Mm,
the left. So sometimes the ideology will soak through the company and into the policies of whatever platform you're using. So naturally, if you're more to the right, you're gonna feel like these policies are more skewed towards against you and more in favor of other people.
but I don't think this is the I under I don't think this is the prime example that people should be using, because she could ease because to a certain extent she could have worded what she wanted to say
Yeah,
differently and would not have had a problem, right? She could have made her point just as well without referring to the Holocaust and the persecution of Jews in 1930s Germany, in Nazi Germany. She could have made her argument equally well, or made it come across just as well, that she felt that it's not legitimate to have a conservative point of view in the public eye anymore. She could have
yeah,
made that perfectly, but there's a part of me um, that understands where you're coming from, but there's also part of me like, why do we have to keep upbringing? Why do villains constantly have to be called Hitlers, and why does
yeah.
persecution constantly
Always
have to
go
be
to the
compared to?
extreme.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm,
Like there are certain like I under it seems to also to be like, as because of free speech, we should also be able to compare things however we want to, right? And you should be able to mention the Holocaust whenever you want to. But despite the fact that we do have free speech, I also think I have this probably this feeling of like, yeah, but there are certain things that even though you can speak about them, just don't.
yeah,
Like,
you
just
shouldn't.
leave it.
Yeah, you
You
shouldn't.
know, like why it's uncalled for to make a comparison between Republicans and in the U.S. today and Jews in the 1930s. The point is, and her point was, and you can bring up the quote. I think we should bring up
Yeah,
the quote.
I'll let
But
you
as far as
finish
I,
and
yeah,
bring up the quote right after.
yeah. So as far as I understand it, what she's saying is that to get to a situation where people are killed, you first have to create an environment where hate towards a specific group is
Yeah,
socially acceptable.
yeah,
I don't know if you want to read the exact
yeah.
tweet or
Let me read it
whatever it
for
was.
you and people watching. So, obviously people are saying that she made a couple of controversial posts on social media. This is the first one that I'm sorry, you're getting a black screen. Let me find the right window for you here. It should be here. There we go. Technical issues. So this is what she started out by tweeting or by putting up on social media, right? She's saying that Jews were beaten in the streets not by Nazi soldiers but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? So that's her first so-called controversial post on social media, and I would like for us to discuss, like, I don't think that's controversial because I kind of see, I the view that I take is that people are allowed to have different opinions. People are even allowed to express things in a very radical way, as long as you
Mm.
don't threaten people, as long as you don't break the law. In my views, you're allowed to say things, but should you say things, right? Like, there's a
Yeah,
difference between the moral, like the right morally and the right legally. I don't think any of that comes anywhere near being legally wrong. I don't think it comes anywhere near being morally wrong either. But I understand that I'm a bit on the extreme side of what allowing people to just speak their mind freely, to say what you want to say. I don't have any interest in censoring people or telling people you shouldn't say this, keep this in, keep and let this out. I don't want to be that filter for people because I trust that most people can kind of have that filter on their own, and if they can't, then I just assume that other people will look at it the same way that I do, that it's a bit weird, and then kind of move on.
I disagree with you probably on what you began on this distinction you made between something being legally incorrect or legally allowable and morally allowable. I probably agree with you in the sense that this is not this shouldn't be illegal, but morally I do think this is not this is it's not like I'm shocked and I can't handle it. And, ooh, my liberal sensibilities are hurt and I can't handle it. Right?
Yeah.
If you look at the Guardian article that I was introduced by, it said the title is Gina Carano fired from the Mandalorian after abhorrent social media posts.
Yeah.
To me, that's pushing it slightly. This is just it's unwise, it's unnecessary, it's uncalled for, it lacks class, and it exaggerates. And well, and apart from that, I think I don't agree with her in the sense that this. Let me just find exactly because history is edited. What are you talking about? Like, there seems to be this obsession on the right claiming that history is constantly being edited. When I'm like, no, I'm well aware. Like Kristallnacht, if you know your history, you know Kristallnacht, which is this night where Jews were rounded up, their stores were burned, and this was happening by the police, but it was also happening by civilians. It's not a hidden fact that that yeah that Jews were despised by civilians, but it's also,
Yeah.
let's not forget, this wasn't a uniquely German thing. Now I may be diving a little bit too much into details and going off on a tangent,
But
but anti
before you do, let me
yeah.
just interrupt and say that in terms of what you're saying, because Shay is adding to what you're saying. She says that she was absolutely right. History is so sanitized because no one wants to be the villain. Wars are started by the people normalizing abuse of others. Just to, because she's kind of commenting on what you're saying as well.
Yeah, can you read the last part of it again? Wars are
Yeah.
started by.
Wars are started by the people normalizing abuse of other people.
Yeah, I would say that that's generally true, but I don't see there. I just don't agree. I don't think history is sanitized. Um, but maybe that's just because I attempt to dive a little bit deeper. But what my
That
point
might be
was,
the case.
yeah, but my point is that if you look at anti-Semitism historically, anti-Semitism is not a uniquely German thing. Anti-Semitism was ripe in all of Europe. It
Yeah,
was right,
very true.
like there was anti-Semitism in Denmark, where we live. There was anti-Semitism in France. There was anti-Semitism in the UK. So creating an atmosphere um, where you could blame Jews for the ills of an entire country, it wasn't difficult. It was already there. So I disagree with her, and this is I don't know how to argue my case, and I don't necessarily know how to argue against the commentator. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name.
Shay.
But my at least my knowledge of history, um, what I've always been interested in is yeah yeah, maybe it's just because my pursuit of history is never one that has attempted to sanitize things, but I can understand that maybe if you're a history teacher, you attempt to you don't want to teach your 10th graders about you know
That's a huge
Auschwitz.
right now. There's a huge move in the political world, especially on the American left. A huge move to take down statues of people from the era of when you owned slaves. So in America, you have a lot of these presidents and other governmental figures. You put up statues, and they found themselves in the era of owning slaves, right?
Yeah.
and or and people want some people want to take those statues down, and I think that's what she's talking about when she's saying that history is so sanitized, that you're trying to take away the bad parts of history and kind of wipe it out and make it more clean so that it looks better.
Mm, yeah, well, I wouldn't call taking down statues sanitizing, because I think it's because to me sanitizing is saying is to hide the facts, the elements of history that you're ashamed about, right? Like if we look at the Turkish regime denying the Austrian genocide, no, not Austrian, Armenian genocide,
Mm.
right? Like I think it's up towards like the figure I've heard, if I remember correctly, is like 1 million people, 1 million Armenians killed by the Turkish government. And if a country recognizes the Armenian genocide as being real, the Turkish government will stop will cut off international relations. So that to me is sanitizing, right?
Yeah.
Saying the left saying we shouldn't. Not that I think a lot of this statue taking down, some of it is legitimate and some of it is exaggerated, but but um, but taking down a statue to me is slightly different. I wouldn't call it sanitized, um, but that's I think we're going a little bit off. I think my yeah. My main point is
She's basically saying that she's trying to pinpoint a time, as you said some time ago, that she's talking about a time before the Nazi regime came fully into effect. She's saying that what led to a suppressive regime was a few steps. You didn't just have it from one day to another. So she's saying that one of the first steps is for the government to begin to make people hate each other for their political views or for the way they look or for all kinds of different things that you'll always find differences in your neighbor. And when the government or authorities or a specific party is beginning political party is beginning to make people detest each other because of differing opinions, basically, that's where, if you accept that, that's where it becomes um, a fragile society, right?
yeah,
She's arguing that point.
but is that true, right? One thing is whether or not you think you need to use the example of the Holocaust to argue that case, right? My position is no. Like the Holocaust is an unique in the worst terrible way it can be unique.
Yeah.
It is a uh, historical event that we hope will never be repeated again. It isn't a mundane thing that you can just bring in anytime you want to talk about being oppressed. It's not, because it's different. Because being a Jew in the 30s and the 40s is very different than being a Republican nowadays.
Yeah.
That's the first point. The second point, which is maybe where we should spend more time of our discussion, is this idea is more is is what she's is her point, right? Instead of getting hung up on the Jewish comparison, what is she actually arguing towards? And what you're saying, I'm skeptical about. Do you really think the government, the American government, is attempting to create an environment where Republicans are hated? If look, we can just
Yes.
yeah, okay.
That's the clear answer.
Well, see, I'm not
No,
sure
no, 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 I'm joking. I'm joking.
because sorry, I'm a bit maybe too serious right now, but we talked about Biden's inaugural speech a
Yeah.
few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And one of your commentators wrote, or one of your subscribers or followers on one of the social networks, wrote that he found, even though he was a conservative, I believe he was quite moved by the speech.
Yeah.
And I understand your skepsis that when you're losing, everything's division, but when you're winning, everything's unity. But it's difficult for me to take on listening to that kind of a speech, like listening to Biden hammer down, we need to be together, we need to be together, and then hear someone say, no, look, the left-leaning government is trying to make all right-leaning conservatives look like feel afraid.
Yeah.
There seems to be some kind of I'd like to hear a little bit more from those kinds of people to hear where is it exactly you're getting this from? Like where is that messaging coming from? Because I don't see it. And at least it's not the same way as they do.
Yeah. So obviously we don't live in the US, so we don't feel it the same way that most people feel it. And I think that's a good thing when you can be someone who looks on from the outside and not be too caught up in the emotions of it all. But I understand if you're a conservative, especially in the US, other countries as well, you see these tech companies become like they are liberal by the nature or by the fact that the leaders and CEOs and directors have a very liberal viewpoint. You have the same thing happening in Hollywood, right? In the entertainment business, in the news media as well, where it's easy to find yourself in a position if you hold certain views that most people, in the news, in entertainment, bullies in politics will try to come after you for your viewpoints. And I think if you're a conservative, you're seeing all of these forces come together at the same time, and conservatives tend to be more laid back, tend to be more like, just do your own thing, just leave me alone, have my freedoms. While liberals in these times, it used to be different, but in these times, they tend to want the government to take slightly more control over things. A lot of the senators in the US are encouraging Joe Biden to sign more executive orders to push through his agenda. So instead of just going through the normal legal process of putting it through the Senate and so on, I, I think if you're sitting on the outside, I can see how conservatives feel like they're getting more and more trapped. It's not just like, obviously now we're in a pandemic time and you're isolated. You can't speak to that
Yeah.
many people, so you go online and you talk to people there. But now your viewpoints are, if you're making a joke about, let's say, like a certain group of people, unless it's white people, it's never going to be okay on social media, and you're probably going to get a little censored for it. Whereas I am someone who's like, if you can joke about one group of people, you should be able to joke about every group of people, because I find us all equal. Like, we should all be equal. I don't want to look at someone differently because they look differently. And that's, but that's how a lot of the left and a lot of how social media now is run. That's how they prefer people to look at things. And I don't want to say that the whole government is trying to separate people into two different camps, but they do. It's that the media and the government work. Some parts of the government working with the mainstream media are very effective at picking a side and then understanding my business model works best. I can get more people on my side if I'm speaking instead of moderately, just talking to the most amount of people. Like, most people are just moderate, I'm assuming, and instead of just addressing those people, I think that media companies are trying to separate people, because you understand that if you can separate people, you can have a whole group of people on your side. And it's much better as a business if you can have people on your side than just people watching what you say or listening to what you say. It's more profitable.
But that business model is applies equally to the right as it does to the left. You can accuse Fox News of doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, but that would be
And
the only one, dude. It would be the only company out of how many? Six, seven, 6, 7 major news outlets in the US.
but Fox is the Fox is the Fox is the genesis of this entire thing. Fox is the first is if I had to
Yeah, I
Fox
wouldn't
is the one
disagree
who
with that
Fox
necessarily.
is the one who began politicized news. They're not they're and look, there's a your arguments to me, you can still vote conservative, right? If you want to, in 2 years, I believe, right, most of the people for are in Congress, in the US and Senate are up for re-election. If you want, if you are conservative, go vote conservative, right? The fact, like, saying that the online, look, I have a growing concern that we're making the online world too important, right? We're
Mm, yeah.
where there's too much crossover between what happens in the real world where my body is physically and what happens online where my fingers are typing. I don't think that, because fundamentally I don't think the two places are the same. Maybe they are. I'm not convinced that they are. And saying that because I can't make my opinions on, well, one, I wouldn't say it's not possible to argue your case on social media. You just have to do it a little bit wisely. Because she could have made, like, I go back to my original point, she could have made the exact same argument if she just hadn't mentioned the Holocaust or Jews. she would have been fine,
Yeah, but I
right?
just want to
So
say
it's
because people are calling her a Holocaust denier, and she didn't even mention the Holocaust. She said that Jews in the beginning of the Nazi regime, before it became a Holocaust, she's saying that Jews were beaten by not by soldiers but by neighbors in the streets first,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
No,
that's the
I
first
wouldn't.
step. That's not the Holocaust.
No, no, and I'm not calling her a Holocaust denier.
Yeah,
That's not what
yeah.
I'm saying, right?
It's just some people in the news media.
I don't understand that criticism. That criticism is people who who I don't know where that honestly that kind of seems a bit baffling because how would you get if you've actually spent time trying to understand the tweet and looking at it more than just skimming it, I don't understand how you can come to that
But that's
conclusion.
a good point. I just want to add to this, and this is why I think a lot of conservatives are worried, because what you're saying is why would you add to that? Why would you add the inference that she's a Holocaust denier when obviously she's not even addressing the Holocaust? She's
Mm.
addressing the beginning of the Nazi regime before it became a Holocaust. And I, if you're a conservative looking onto this, you kind of think that they're doing this to make you look worse to other people than you are. Because if you look worse, if you look like a Holocaust denier, then it's easy to get rid of you. It's not easy to get rid of you if you just express your opinions. If you're just saying that basically at the start of the Nazi regime, before it really became bad, the neighbors were beating up the Jews instead of actually German soldiers. And that's what she's saying. But now by calling her, putting her into a box of calling her a Holocaust denier, transphobic, and all of these bad words, which she doesn't even fit into. By calling her all of those names, they've been successful in convincing Disney to let her go. And that's what people call the cancel culture. That you disagree with someone, so you want to see them gone. It's not enough for you to just ignore their opinion and move on. You have to see them gone from the platform. That's what people are worried about.
Yeah, I mean the transphobic thing. That's because of earlier tweets she made where she made some jokes that people consider politically incorrect, right? So
Yeah, I'll find
just
that one also.
for context, I it it does strike me though a little bit like a storm in a teacup. I don't know if that's the maybe because maybe I'm being overly relaxed about this. I don't know. Um, but I still find it difficult to believe that if you sit down with another person and you express your opinions
Yeah,
in the most rational, realistic, unextreme way,
yeah,
that the other person would be like, no, I can't deal with that. Right? Like don't get like I think you and I we can agree with that there are certain factions of the left, particularly the one that's far left, that engages in cancel culture and deplatforming and all of these things
yeah.
that's unhealthy.
Hmm.
But saying that because there exists a faction on the far left or on a section of the left that generally is further to the left,
Yeah,
because that exists, now all of a sudden all of the left is engaging in cancel culture and deplatforming, and that we can't speak our minds because because there exists this faction seems to be um, looking at a piece and assuming that it represents the whole when it
yeah,
doesn't.
yeah,
If to your point earlier, if the average American, if the average person is a moderate, then the average person can also be, you can have a conversation with the average person because there will be a point where they overlap.
yeah,
You and I, we don't share political orientation. I think you and I are both fairly in the middle. You're maybe a little bit to the right of the middle, and I'm maybe a little bit to the left of the middle.
yeah,
But we overlap a lot, which is
yeah, for sure.
um, so it seems to be um, there seems to be a hint, and I'm saying this carefully. I'm saying this very carefully. I'm trying to say this carefully. I think there's a hint of fear mongering at play as well. Like you see this thing and then you exaggerate it to the point where like, oh, I can't speak my mind. And yes, that's maybe true for Gina Carano. But is it really true for John Smith, who works at a auto repair shop in Topeka, Kansas? Like,
But dude, if they come for Gina, one day and they're successful and she has a bigger platform than you, then when they come for you and you share your views and you get banned off of social media for saying something they don't like, you're gonna have no way to retaliate. She has a way of kind of hitting back because she has enough reach and she has enough people following her that she can do her own thing. But if they came for you, especially in a time like this in a pandemic, that you'd be censored in a way that you wouldn't be able to reach out and communicate with a lot of people that you otherwise would. I just want to say that you and Shay are pretty much in sync because every time she's commenting, you're mentioning the same thing. She says that when you were talking, she said that social media is also a breeding ground for the vocal minority. They are the farthest on either extreme and yelling the loudest. People who are not on the internet as much are in the middle.
And
Totally
that's what
agree with
you
that, by the way.
yeah. You're what you were talking about earlier about the model, the economic model of the social media platforms is they heighten outrage, right?
Mm.
Because outrage is more appealing. Um, Outrage creates more of an emotional response,
Yeah,
right? The more
yeah,
if you see something nice, you engage with it emotionally to a certain extent. If you see something outrageous, if you see something that makes you angry, you engage with it even more.
yeah,
And since the economic model is primarily about time, they want to keep you as long as possible on the platform. The
yeah,
more emotionally you engage, the more you're likely to stay, which is why they're likely to heighten outrage, to heighten posts and to highlight posts and highlight issues that create outrage.
yeah,
So in that way, like Shay is saying, it becomes a breeding ground for extremists.
yeah,
But and I take your point that in pandemic times, social media is how we communicate because we don't have other options. But cross our fingers, this pandemic is going to end at some point, and then we go back, and then to say that we have no other recourse, right? Like if you're censored on social media, then all of a
mm,
sudden you lose all agency is untrue. You can still vote, right? Like you still have the possibility of changing the the percentage of the different. You have the possibility of
representatives.
changing the Senate, right?
Yeah,
And in 4 years you have a possibility of voting for a conservative president into power again. So it isn't as if the American system has broken down over the last 4 years, right? The bones of a system that has kept it in, that has kept the country working
yeah,
mostly. There are obviously
mostly.
yeah, because every country has its sins, right? I know the word
Yeah,
sin is highly unpopular, but there's no country that can say no, we've never committed an evil act,
except Denmark.
except Denmark, of course, because
Yeah,
we're all saints. Except for
obviously the
shooting
Viking Age
Germans.
and
Yeah, yeah, and after World War II, Germans were basically slaughtered on the streets, and they weren't given fair trials. And if you were accused of being a co-conspirator or an ally to the Germans during occupation, no trial either. Boom, you could get shot on the street.
yeah. And it's weird to see now how the Vikings are like exalted in
Yeah,
both like in games like Valhalla, the newest Assassin's Creed game, in TV shows, in like Odin and Thor, all
yeah,
of those like in the Marvel universe, but they
yeah,
were like savages. Like we're descendants of the most brutal savages probably that there were. Like just going to other nations, and they knew these were other countries just ravaging, pillaging, raping, like
yeah.
just plundering their way through other countries.
There was no respect for. Yeah, I think the rape part especially, because it wasn't like no, 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 don't do that. It was like, it was a free for all. They could do exactly whatever they wanted. There was no morals there in that sense.
So you
Um,
mentioned that you can just vote people into office. You can, if you dislike what's going on in your country, you can just vote other people into office. I think these social media companies are
mhm.
becoming so big and they donate money to most politicians as well. So you don't really see when they break these rules that they're supposed to keep. Um, there's not really any consequences, right? So one of the I think some people are finding that you're on social media, and you if you're on the right, if you're conservative, you don't like you're running out of places to take your concerns, because you can take it to the presidency or vote in some Republican or a conservative, even like, you know, you can do those things. But I just think that social media companies, if they really censor you for your political opinion, first of all, I think that's bad. I think legally they should be allowed to. But I think if they do it, if there's a clear skew towards one side, I just think that you can quickly, with the size of social media companies, how big they are and how fast and rapidly they're growing. I think we can come to a place where you can quickly lose like 90% of your ability to be heard by people. And I think the worry is the double standard that you're being excluded for your political opinion. An example of this is I just want to show you and you guys a tweet that Pedro Pascal, who plays the Mandalorian himself in the show, he tweeted this because I thought it was a really good comparison to what Gina was tweeting as well. I'm not sure you can see this, but take a look at this. He basically posted a picture of saying on the top it says Germany 1944, and it's kids in a cage behind it like a fence, and obviously these are Jews put in concentration camps. Then under it, there's a picture of these young brown kids put in a jail as well, and it says America 2018. You know, so he's making a statement that, you know, to me that statement is almost like you can't say that what Gina is doing is horrible and what Pedro is doing is fine, yet only one of them is getting all the hate and all the heat from one side. And the fear is that it's because Gina is right wing, it's because she's conservative, and Pedro is obviously, the way he talks about issues and so on, he's obviously on the left, like most people in Hollywood are. So the concern is that, okay, so he can make the comparison, direct comparison to 1944 Nazi Germany, but Gina can't even make the comparison to the early onset of the Nazi regime.
But okay, yeah, I take your point. I think my thinking is just going one step ahead. You can't.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. The connection is pretty poor.
You can't make the social media companies more left leaning, right? You can't convince them to like how would you actually convince them
Yeah,
to not do this? You can't, right? The
yeah,
people who are on their board are the people who are on their board, and as you were saying, legally they have the right to exclude whoever they want to from
yeah,
their
exactly.
platforms,
Yeah,
right? So how do you solve this issue? Well, to me, that's the crux. The crux of the issue is then you become smarter in the way you argue, right? And I think this comes back to my original point.
hmm
She could have said the exact same thing and not have been any trouble. But because, yeah, how am I supposed to word this the best way? Whenever I've noticed this, not necessarily arguing with you, but arguing with other people, or having conversations with other people, I'll make an example. It's like yada yada yada,
yeah,
because I'm trying to, because I think it'll be a way for them to understand what I'm talking about better.
yeah,
And what often happens is that they begin to deconstruct my example.
yeah.
So they
Attacking
focus over
the wrong argument.
yeah, and I'm like, no, well, my argument isn't my example. My example was supposed to support the argument. Deconstruct my argument, don't deconstruct my example, because
Yeah.
the example isn't perfect. It's always
Yeah.
going to have its limitations because it's an example. And this is how, and so I not that I am successful in this, but I attempt more now when I talk to people to use example less and to speak as clearly as I can about what I'm trying to say. And it can still be misconstrued because we're still when we communicate, you have your perception, and whatever I say, it's still going to be received on your end based on your bias. But the more you can say without hyperbole, to the point, what you think, without exaggeration, and clear, not because I'm condoning the behavior that's being that not because I'm condoning the article, or calling her comments abhorrent, or
Yeah.
like I think I think it's uncalled for, right? Let's get that clear. I think it's uncalled for, but I also think that the response has been disproportionate. Um, but if I were a conservative, I, I can understand the frustration. I can understand that feeling of like I'm being gagged for something that is a reasonable opinion. Okay, well then the response to that is not to come is to speak it is to come with your arguments in exactly the most reasonable way you can. And that's where she went wrong. Not because she should be necessarily punished for
Hmm.
misspeaking, because
Yeah.
I misspeak here all the time, right? I'm not as clear as I'd want to be. But the response to, and I think the response to someone being unreasonable is not to be more unreasonable. It's to stick to your guns and claim that you're being as reasonable as you possibly can. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
No, but I get it, and I think that's what we need. That's a good point. We need like I think that's a good point. Shay is saying that the photo that was on the tweet that Pedro tweeted wasn't even taken in America. Also, isn't he from Spain? Does he remember what Spain did to South America?
He's
What?
Chilean, but okay.
He's Chilean.
I'm pretty sure he's Chilean.
Potato, potato.
Hey, careful.
To Victor, by the way, to you guys, Victor grew up partly in South America, so to him, to me, South America, like culturally, feels like maybe there's a difference like Mexico and the rest, but to me, it feels like a lot of the same. But obviously, to you, it's gonna feel very different. Um,
Yeah, you could say that.
Certainly, also when you come from like a country like Colombia going to Denmark, like
Yeah.
the difference must be massive.
Oh, yeah, don't get me started on that. But what can you read her point? She was saying, yeah,
She
the
said,
picture wasn't even taken in the US, right?
yeah, the picture. So he's comparing two pictures. One of these, I think he's referring to the kids in cages at the border between the U.S. and Mexico.
Yeah.
So
But
and then he's posting it next to this picture of Nazi Germany with kids caught in a concentration camp, which is a radical
yeah,
comparison.
but see, I don't understand this way of doing things. Like an immoral act is immoral regardless of what it's being compared to.
Yeah,
Putting children in cages is immoral enough that it doesn't need to be compared to anything else. Uh, Again, I don't. It seems to be an unhealthy and unnecessary way of arguing.
yeah, I get what you mean. Like, but that's we've talked about this before. How the social
Mm,
media it, like you just said before, it adds like the more outrageous you can be, the more interactions you're gonna get, the more your tweet or your post is going to be promoted, put on top of the page because it creates an incentive for people to stay longer. And this kind
yeah,
of responding with gifs and like it for sure it can be funny, right? Like a lot of the times you just do it when you're having fun. But if you're just responding this way, um, you're not really adding constructively. You're basically just trying to do punchlines, right?
mm,
And that's a very unconstructive way of trying to get your opinion across. I just want to say that what Gina said about I just want to show you the tweet that she made about the transgender issue. I'm not going to dwell too long on the transgender issue because I'm not for harassing any group of people, whether they be transgender or other people. So I'm not going to stay on it. But she tweeted. Let me find it for you guys. By the way, he made another tweet which was kind of crazy as well. Take a look at this, guys. Gina tweeted, or she put into her bio. You know how some people now on social media they put into their bio the pronouns you prefer and all of this. So Gina
Yeah.
put in, because she's involved with Star Wars. So she
Oh
put
yeah,
in,
that's what she did.
yeah. So she put in beep slash bob slash boob, the sounds of an R2D2 unit, right?
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be a joke. It's supposed to be just messing around. You're just having fun. But that people came down on that tweet just as hard as they did on the initial the other tweet about
Yeah.
Nazi Germany. And then she responded by saying, beep slash boob slash Bob, I think, has zero to do with mocking trans people and 100% to do with exposing the bullying mentality of the mob that has taken over the voices of many genuine causes. I want people to know you can take hate with a smile, so boob you for misunderstanding. I listen. I agree with the idea of don't be so stuck up. Don't let people say what they want. Don't, just because people say something offensive, you don't have to get offended, right? You can just take it with a smile, as she's saying. You can just, like, you don't have to censor people because they say something that you basically disagree with. I just want the reason I'm saying this is that I went on Reddit. I posted a video because she made me think about the whole transgender issue. So and how Joe Biden annulled the Article 9 that makes sure that boys can't jump into girls' sports and the other way around in the US. Now, he signed an executive order that made sure that now, if you're a boy, if you're a man, essentially, and you feel like a woman, you don't have to have surgeries or anything. You can jump into women's sports. So I posted a video of this guy. It's like 18 seconds long, and there's nothing offensive about it. It's just a guy running 200 meters in like a sprint with like four other girls, and he's owning them. He first off, he's much bigger. He's got much longer legs, and he just sprints away, and they have no chance. And he transitioned recently, so he didn't win anything in the guys' sport. Now he goes over with the girls, and now he's beating the crap out of them. So that's one case. But imagine if that happens in Gina is an ex martial artist, mixed martial artist, and imagine if a guy came into the world of women's mixed martial arts. It, like, certain things just shouldn't be allowed, and not
But it
because
happens.
yeah, and not
That has
because
happened.
I saw the video of this monster of a guy saying that, okay, so he transitioned, now he's a woman,
Yeah.
and he's beating up these ladies, and it's brutal to watch. It's At the end of the day, I posted that 18 second clip on Reddit, and
Yeah.
I was flagged for being transphobic. I didn't put, the only thing I wrote, to be fair, I want to be fair. So the thing I wrote as a title, I just wrote, Joe Biden signs into law this executive order. Now, thankfully, men and women are equal. And then I put in real world and then the video. So in
Yeah.
the real world, this is what it means when you, and people flag me for being transphobic, that I have an irrational fear of transgender people because I put up that video. If I get one other strike, I'm wiped away off of Reddit. But because I posted that video.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna take the side of like the liberal who thinks that yeah, something you and I have talked about. I don't know if it was just privately or on this, is that it's difficult to have a conversation where you don't entirely represent one side of the argument, or
Yeah,
you don't
yeah,
entirely
yeah,
represent one side.
yeah.
I don't represent the left. Um, for
And
one,
I
because I don't. Yeah.
and I mean, I often in our talks, I represent the right, but I live in Denmark,
Mm,
so my if I went to the US, my opinions would be at the very least very moderate.
yeah.
But for the sake of argument, often because obviously also I feel sympathy for basically a group of people, the conservatives online, that seem to be more and more like bullied. Scott Webb is saying that Lebanon is where the pic was taken. The picture of the kids in the
Okay.
it was at a water distribution facility. So I understand. So it's actually not in the
So,
cages in the U.S.
yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think the if you look at the issues with trans people, it's something like 40% of them commit suicide,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
So
they attempt to commit suicide.
yeah, it's okay. Attempt 40% attempt to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So again, it's because you said that you're concerned with you have a concern for conservatives online who aren't allowed to speak their voices. A liberal will probably tell you, I'm concerned with all the transphobic, not transphobic, with all the transgender
Transgender
people,
people. Yeah.
where close to half of them will attempt to commit suicide.
Hmm.
And I think part of the thinking behind that is, well, the more insults they get, the more the more, yeah, the harder it is for them just to be, the more people pay attention,
Hmm.
essentially. The more people pay attention, the more noticed it is that they are trans, the harder it is, and the more likely it is they'll commit suicide. I
Yeah.
don't know if that line of reasoning is correct, because I don't think because statistically I don't think that 40% number hasn't changed for like 20 or 30 years. I don't want to be like, don't quote me on that because I'm not 100% sure. I'm saying this very tentatively, but as far as I know, that 40% number has been fairly stable.
Yeah.
I don't want, maybe not 10 or 20 or 30 years, but at least the last decade. I think that's pretty safe to assume, which is interesting considering how much our opinions have changed in the last decade.
Yeah.
Anyways, but it's just to say, my point with that, before I get flagged as being a hater of all of these things, a hater of all of these groups, which we neither you are or I are.
Obviously.
It's different. You're protecting different people, right? Essentially,
Yeah.
you're protecting different groups.
Yeah.
And then you can say, yeah, the way you do it is excessive. I
Mhm.
don't. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you on that.
Do you
That
like the
it's
idea of protecting individual groups instead of protecting people in general? Do you think like certain groups should merit more protection in social media?
I have no idea.
I
I don't know.
that question was like I could see it on your face how how much of a load that question was like overload.
No, well, it's because I've been thinking. Okay, you and I have discussed Jordan Peterson, at least in private,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he's very much about the individual,
Yeah.
and and I understand where he comes from that perspective. And if you look at the left tends to think more in a collective, and
Hmm.
I've struggled to see how the two things, how to separate the two things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you meet a person at a party and you ask them about themselves, generally one of the ways they'll describe themselves is how they relate to larger groups,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm a conservative. Boom, you're associating yourself with a larger group. I'm a Dane, larger group. I'm a man, larger group. I'm straight, larger group. I'm an Arsenal fan, larger group.
Tiny
You
group.
know, tiny group, unfortunately. It's been tough the last decade. Um, but yeah. Anyways, what I'm saying is that it seems to me that the group and individual are intrinsically linked. We go to, and it's as if the individual goes to a group to find out who they are, and then find out that the group doesn't entirely define who they are
Yeah.
because you are more than that group, and then
Mm.
you leave the group. But you're always but who you are is always somewhere in flux between being in a group and being out of a group. You're
Yeah.
always in and out.
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, the human animal understands the world, and I'm sorry, this is totally an overreach of that. This is maybe much too broad a statement that I should be allowing myself to make, but I think the human animal understands itself in us and them categories. That's categories that we have to understand the world around us. So saying, I'm sorry, I'm making this your question very abstract, and I'm having a hard time giving you a very clear, definitive answer. But it's because when I think about individuals and groups, I think of them as linked. I don't think of them as being separate.
I don't
Because we're
either.
constant. So I don't know how to answer that question. Because should you protect groups? Sure. Should you protect individuals? Sure. How do you do that in a healthy way? How do you protect individuals in a healthy way? Because I'm sure you can meet trans people out there who are totally fine with Gina Carano's group, with Gina Carano's statements,
For sure.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you? So then it's also the question of who speaks for a group,
Yeah.
right? Who speaks for? Is it the most extreme activists that speak for the group? Is it or the most moderate? You know it. Um,
Yeah, like Shay was
it's
saying, you often hear from the most vocal, but they tend to be
mm,
the minority. I think that's so true, but I just wonder about the idea of protecting people based on like one box, right? Because transgender people are probably the most protected in social media, and as you're saying, it could be just a correlation between them being the most uh,
vulnerable.
yeah, vulnerable out of what we know. Thanks, that's the
Yeah.
word I was looking for. And they, if you if you put them in a box, it makes sense that you want to protect them, but by protecting them, you're also not really exposing them to real life. I don't like this idea of, let's say the next group is a less vulnerable group. I don't like this idea of social media companies being your dad or your mom, making sure
Mm,
that you're protected from seeing mean things that people say, because if you keep protecting yourself to the point of, we're not going to allow anyone to say anything against this group of people based on the way that we view them inside of that tiny little box that they don't fit in.
mm,
You're shielding people. You're I don't like the idea of, if you're transgender, then um, you shouldn't harass people. I'm not for harassing anyone, but I don't like the idea of you shielding someone else from other people's opinions, because typically other people's opinions is what drives us further. If you're left alone and you're never challenged on your ideas, you're gonna become, depending on who you are, you're gonna become more radical, or you're gonna become. I just don't like. I think it's a bad idea to not challenge other people's ideas. You shouldn't be hateful, right? But hateful, like, shouldn't, as in morally shouldn't, not legally. Legally you can be hateful all you want, but in my view. But
yeah.
that's another word that people bring up. They bring up this word hateful, and they put it on you. And if you're a hateful person, then you shouldn't be allowed to be online. There's something called, this is a good example. Hate crimes. So there's something people call hate crimes now. And it's not a legal category. It's kind of just something we made up along the way, but it's not defined legally. So people would put all kinds of things into the category of hate crimes. So all of a sudden, it used to be just racism, or an attacks on individual groups of people, like that would be hate crimes. But now people are saying that Gina Carano should be removed for being a hateful person, for having hateful ideas. I think we're moving in a really bad, like, we're going down a bad path if you're beginning to ban ideas, because some people find them offensive, or some people find them hateful. Because if they ban ideas that are pretty mainstream, it's just a matter of time before they keep extending that ban, keep extending it until it hits you. And once it hits you, it's already too late to do anything about it.
We've had this conversation previously where we discussed whether or not social media is the best place to have a political conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of social media, which is kind of paradoxical since I'm having a conversation with you that's being streamed on YouTube. But in general, or by like I've been an ad like I've attempted to have this conversation with nearly everyone I know, where I'm trying to talk about the negatives of social media. And
Yeah.
I'm not on like I'm on Facebook because people expect me to be on Facebook, but if it were up to me, I would be off all of those
Yeah, I
things.
saw you
And
were
if it were up
gone
to
for like a
me,
long time.
if it were up to me, I'd throw my iPhone into the lake and like, not because that's social media, but because the way it's designed is ingrained with social media, right?
Yeah.
What are they called? Notifications. The way that they pop up notifications.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced, and here's my. I think what the social media companies have done is they've sold us a pirated version of communication. When you buy a pirated Gucci bag or whatever, you assume it pretends to be the real deal,
Mm.
but it's not. It's of lesser quality,
Yeah.
right? When you buy a pirated DVD, not that anyone buys DVDs anymore, but generally you'll find out they're of inferior quality. And what social media companies have done is they've led us to believe, in my perception at least, that the conversations and the communication and the interaction and the interpersonal relationships that we have on social media are just as good as the ones that we have in real life. They're just as valid, they're just as deep, they have just as much intimacy. And they don't. And
Yeah,
so
they don't.
and obviously we're in our context, we're in the pandemics, which mean we're in the pandemic. I guess you could just call it the pandemic now. And so the context is different. But at the end of the day, if you expect that our democracy can happen online in these social medias and not around the dinner room table, not around when you're having a coffee at work,
Yeah.
not around when you're out getting a smoke at work, not when you're meeting your friends in the classroom. If that's your expectations, then you're going to be disappointed. Um, I'm currently studying to be a teacher, and one of the thinkers we studied is a Danish thinker called Helkoch. His last name is spelled Koch, and what he says about democracy, he says is if you think the central element of democracy is voting, then you've mistaken what democracy is. Democracy is a conversation, and the vote that you have is simply to see how far along and what point are we in the course of our conversation. So if you see, for example, children who say, "Oh, let's do something democratic, let's vote," boom. In Helcock's view, he would say you're misunderstanding what democracy is, because democracy is a conversation. And if we're expecting that we can have this conversation on social media, then we're wrong, because we can never have a nuanced, deep conversation on social media. And so these problems are just going to be exacerbated. The divisions are just going to be exacerbated because nuance is where we come to understand each other. If you're never going to understand another person if all they present to you are the broad strokes of their opinion.
Yeah. That's very true. I
Um,
didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, I should, yeah. We mentioned deplatforming previously, and I was thinking about, in the same sense that you have deplatforming. I'm going to try out an idea on you. In the same sense that you have deplatforming, you have this opposite idea, which is use your platform, right? So if you have a platform, if you are an athlete, if you are an actor, if you're a musician, if you're a recognized artist, whatever you do, if you have some kind of a public image, you should use your platform.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, why is that? Why are you encouraging? Look, there's this, at least in NBA circles, you and I follow that sport a little bit. There's this phrase called "shut up and dribble," which we need to move away from, right? If you want to express your opinion, like, an athlete can be more than just an athlete if they choose to be. I don't want to extend this view that you're not allowed to speak your mind, but at the same time, I don't why. Let's say you're a footballer, you play soccer, and you speak out on issue X.
Yeah.
Why should I care? You haven't achieved your platform because of your intellect. With all due respect, footballers can be very intelligent, but that's not why you've achieved your platform. You've achieved your platform because you're very good at kicking a ball,
Athletics.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So why is there this constant encouraging of people to use their platform when they're not necessarily the best spokesman for the issue? A footballer is not the best spokesman for a certain issue because they're not as educated on the issue as other people are, because they haven't achieved their platform because of that reason. They've achieved their platform for something else. And I wonder if whether or not it's because we've given up on having conversation. So the more people we have on their platforms shouting about a certain issue, the better we are, because we're not interested in whether or not they can defend the issue. We're right, because it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you're a footballer or if you're an athlete or whatever, or you can defend a position. It doesn't matter if you're an academic who has some degree in ecology and you can speak on global warming better than the rest of us can. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we have as many people shouting the same thing as possible, and that speaks to me fundamentally to a culture that has decided that conversation is no longer relevant, that the left and the right are so far apart that we can't have a conversation anymore. So we just need to get as many people as vocal as possible, shouting their given political affiliational position, attempting to make the other side, deafen out the other side. I'm sorry, I'm ranting. I'm really ranting. But
It's a good rant.
um, again, I'm not a fan of social media. I'm not a fan of people not being allowed to speak their mind on social media. But I don't think the response to this is to get up in arms. I think it's the response to this is to be even more cogent, even more coherent, even more intelligent, to speak your mind even more wisely, and to do so with people you disagree with, like you and I would, like not you, but like you mentioned that as well, right? You should be exposed to other people's opinions as much as possible.
That's a
Right.
traditional view in Western countries, to be exposed
Yeah.
to other people's ideas. We're taught in schools all the way from kindergarten all the way up that you have to be respectful of the teacher, but it's okay to question the teacher. It's all right to question the things that are thrown at you, and that's why it goes against the core of who I am. If you're not allowed to question certain things or talk about certain things, even if you do it in a respectful way, you're still, by it might be right now by a radical few, you're being called words, you're being called hateful or whatever
Yeah.
words. And the problem is when companies like Disney, in this case with Gina, the problem is when you cave to those few radical voices, you give in to the more radical viewpoint. Whereas
Mm.
Shay was saying earlier, you most people are just in the middle. Most people just like a decent people. They don't want to force people to think a certain way, and their viewpoints are quickly faded out in the sea of comments of outrage on social media, especially some platforms. I think Facebook is actually pretty good at fostering pretty good conversation back and forth, because it's not limited to to
Mm.
X amount of letters, which
Yeah.
for some reason, you can have pretty good conversations about almost anything on Facebook, and there'll be haters, but you will have the moderate voices as well. People are like, calm down, let's go over the issue, let's see what
Yeah.
you're actually talking about. I don't know. I don't. I find it hypocritical to go back and kind of round off this whole issue, the Gina and Pedro thing. I find it ironic if you ban one person and you don't ban the other one for pretty much doing the same thing. Then, because then, in my eyes, it becomes something to do with the person's ideologies. Because you're looking for an excuse to get rid of her. You're not doing it fairly. And I don't mind, like legally, these social media companies have the right to do whatever they want to do, right? They can do as they want to do. But something I want to bring up is I made the introduction of my video about Gina. I put it up on TikTok, and a lot of people began commenting. I would like to show you a few of the comments because it really shows you how people think, both from the middle. I had like 50 something comments, and it's all the whole range of people. Some people are saying that it's completely fine. Other people are saying you shouldn't do this. It's limiting the freedoms. And other people are just like kind of like you can see why they would do it, but maybe you shouldn't, you know. So I'm just gonna show you guys a few comments. Like Philip is saying that she doubled down on her hateful rhetoric and spreading misinformation when called out on it. No one is entitled to an acting job or a big platform. So that's that's the one side of the issue. Like you're not entitled to these social media platforms. You don't have a right to it, and she should, if it's hateful, then she should be gotten rid of. If it's, as long as it's hateful, which is a very relative loose box, then it's fine
Yeah.
to get rid of people.
It's hateful. Like you're saying, hateful can be applied to almost anything you don't like.
Yeah, you just
Mm.
don't like it. So other people said that you're allowed to have hateful ideas and opinions. You're even allowed to voice hateful ideas and opinions. However, you must realize that those have consequences.
See, that's what I've been thinking about. Um, there's this. I'm going to bring in an example from the world of sport again. We've talked about wrestling and football and whatever. Um, the Spanish footballer Gerard Piqué, he believes in Catalan independence. He plays Barcelona and he believes Catalan should be independent.
Yeah.
And there was an election, there was a referendum on Catalan independence a few years ago, and he voted in favor. And there was a big outrage because he plays on the Spanish national team. And his response was, if it is a problem that I play for Spain, I'll stop playing for Spain. So it's this idea of like, yes, you should be allowed to say whatever you want to, but there are consequences for what you say. But if there are consequences for what you say, is that a form of censorship? And I can't quite work that out because you know, if you call me an idiot, you're perfectly within your legal right to call me an idiot. But if I
what if
stop
you think
hanging out
that's
with you,
hateful? If
yeah,
you
no, but my
consider
point
that's
is,
hateful.
yeah, but my point is, if I then stop talking to you, is that a form of censorship? Post-fact
Yeah, I see
censorship.
what you mean. Yeah.
But because in another way, it could be no, I'm just there are consequences to saying certain things.
Mm.
Yeah, but when are the consequences? See, as a category, I don't see how the consequences are different than censorship.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because censorship is something that happens before the fact. But if the consequences make you then stop saying that thing next time, then you could say it's a form of censorship. And it's not because I have the answer, it's just because I'm confused by this.
Yeah.
Because there should be a consequence to what you say. When you say something stupid, there should be a consequence. But how do you distinguish the consequence from censorship? Because if there is no distinction, then we're censoring each other all the time. Sorry.
Yeah, we are, and when you go onto a social media platform, you sign the whatever it is you sign initially when you sign up. You sign
Yeah,
the
rights and conditions or whatever it's
yeah,
called.
yeah,
Yeah.
those right. So if those include something like you can't speak out against transgender people, you can't say anything negatively against that group of people, then essentially I think that's fair. Like if you get banned off of a social media platform, to be honest, I don't really have an issue with you getting banned off of social media platforms. I just think that it shouldn't, but they're within the legal rights to ban whoever
Yeah,
they
yeah.
want. But it shouldn't
Yep.
be because of your political opinions, as long as they're even mainstream. Like if you have radical opinions about, that breaks the law, obviously we all agree that you should be banned, right?
Yeah.
At the very least, the posts should be banned. I just think it's a slippery slope if you begin to obviously ban people for their political affiliation and not so much for them breaking a guideline or a rule, but you get rid of them because you don't want that side of the argument on your platform because you think it's hurtful or offensive or hateful. or as people say now, misinformation, which is not a new word, but it's a word that was used effectively in the past to censor people.
There used to be this line of thinking, right? That the internet was a tool of democratization, right? The more, um, if we just could have places with the internet, they'd almost automatically become democratic, right? That was the line of
Yeah.
thinking in the early aughts, in the late 90s,
Mm.
that the internet in of itself was a tool that would make places democratic. And I think we're seeing very much, because I think this, when you're talking about misinformation, then this is an issue that goes beyond just social media, and this is the internet in general, because misinformation can be spread almost anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, on any site you can see misinformation. So it's a pan internet issue. It's an issue that deals with all of the internet, not just social media.
Mm.
But I think we're seeing the limitation, right? We're seeing the breakdown of this idealism around the internet.
Yeah.
The internet is not democratic, automatically democratic, and the internet in its it's designed to spread information, right? It's not designed to verify information.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we're probably just getting to a point where we have to realize that this tool that we have is not equivocally a tool for good, like they thought previously. Oh yes,
Yeah.
it's automatically a tool for good. It'll make places democratic.
Free speech
No.
and expression.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We thought it was just, oh wow, this thing is amazing, and we have to get away from that line of thinking.
Hmm.
The internet is terrible if it's not used correctly.
Yeah.
And it is just as much a vehicle for hate and violence and destruction as it is for communication and empathy and conversation and information and growth.
Yeah.
And until we accept that fact, I think the reason why we're frustrated, broader speaking, and you and I are having this conversation, we're having this conversation because there is a level of frustration, and I think the level of frustration is fundamentally because we don't recognize the internet to be what it actually is. We still cling to the hope that the internet is good, that it is fundamentally good. And this is why we get frustrated, because we hope the internet is good. But if we recognize that the internet is not good, that it is also bad,
Yeah.
then maybe we can let go of our frustration and maybe move on to think about what we do. And I'm not entirely sure I don't know what we do next. But I think the first step is giving up a delusional ideal regarding internet and regarding social media.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. But that idea of the internet not being a like exclusively good place is I agree with that idea. But the problem is the social media companies are trying to enforce it. They're trying to make rules that get rid of hateful ideas and opinions. And just to wrap it up, I think that's what I've got an issue with. On one side, because I agree with you that the internet should be this place where uh, ideas and opinions are free flowing. But now you have companies that are creating just one website, and it's just one website. But what happens when it gets all encompassing? What happens when it's everyone's using Google, everyone's using Facebook, and like later on in maybe 10 years it might just be one big company controlling all of it, even controlling the servers and everything else. It's
Yeah.
I think there needs to be social pressure on social media companies to not get rid of people for their political ideas, even if they call it misinformation, or
Yeah.
because people are grown-ups, and people who like use Facebook and other people are grown-ups, and they can decide for themselves. They don't need an extra set of parents who
I can understand where you come from. Yeah.
I don't like the idea, but as you said to begin with, I don't think it's a matter of nothing should be like everything should be allowed, nothing should be taken away. It lands somewhere in the middle, but I'm much more of a free speech and expression absolutist than a lot of people I speak to, especially in Denmark and in Europe in
Yeah.
general. It's not that popular of a view, but I just think everything else leads us down a road where you're giving too much power to companies and governments. You don't want to hand over that kind of power because you can rarely get it back once you give it away.
It's also just a practical issue of how do you legislate. Like, if I mean, I don't know if this isn't, like, either everything is, if you take some middle position, right? The extremes are everything's illegal or nothing's illegal, right?
Mm.
Like, generally, like, you can say
Yeah.
whatever you want, you can say nothing. Those positions are clear and easy to legislate. But when you're somewhere in the middle, this much is allowed, but that not, like, that's very arbitrary. And how do you draw that line?
Mm.
I don't know. And it becomes very messy, and it becomes very, you end up with the right wanting it one place and the left wanting it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I share your concerns with an internet monopoly, because it certainly has its influence, right? If you look at Google, right, just to give a try to give a concrete example,
Yeah.
the way you design your website, the way you set up your website, influences where you land on on the search on in the search results,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, there is a job that's called search engine optimization. There are people who work for companies, and their role is, oh, I work with search engine optimization.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree that the internet companies have too much influence, and this also refers back to the conversation we had a few weeks ago about Parler, right? If they're closing, you know, it's a sign that maybe they have too much influence when they're able to close down competing sites that come from an ideological slightly different background,
Yeah.
or
And
have
and
a
they're
have
still
a
not back.
yeah. Ah,
And that's
yeah,
what
heard that.
happens when you, because people used to say, well, conservatives should just go make their own platform. They did,
Yeah.
and then they got banned off pretty much off the internet.
I mean, my solution, my my very old school approach would be like, just talk to the people that you know, or talk
Just
to
give up
you know.
social media, talk
Yeah,
to people you
I'm
know.
sorry. Like, the I'm trying to be. I'm just not very. I'm an old man in a young man's body.
With a mighty beard.
I know it's not very constructive. It is not very constructive, because I'm aware that that's a position we'll never get back to. Like, there's no we've crossed the Rubicon, I think, is what you say, right? There's no putting the cat back in the box. There's no closing Pandora's box. These things exist now, and now we have to figure out what we do with them. But I'm just not a fan. I think they're very dangerous. I think they're more dangerous than we recognize, than we allow ourselves to think that they can be. Mm.
And I think we're going down a path where it just keeps escalating. Like technology takes over more and more, where we used to, for like all of the history of humanity, we had human interactions, but now we're having like these social media interactions. You don't get to look at the person often that you speak to, except for like you and I here. But when you just write something, you just letting out your opinions, and it kind of floats somewhere in the air, and then someone responds to it. But you never really have those human interactions. And I'm telling you, we're on the path to robots taking over. I go to the shopping mall. This is a side issue. I go to the shopping mall, and then the girl is like, "Oh yeah, I just lost my job." I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear. Maybe you don't work at the cashier anymore." And then she's like, "No, no, someone replaced it." I'm like, "Who? Robots." She says robots replaced her. Now you have to go to beep at the machine, right?
Yeah. I mean, my father never goes to the robot. If there's a cashier, he always
Yeah,
goes to the cashier
yeah,
for this exact reason. He's like,
yeah.
no, I don't want that person to lose their job.
I keep telling my girlfriend, support the humans. Like let's go to the humans instead of the robots, because these
Yeah,
suckers will take over soon enough, and then they'll have their time. But
yeah, but I mean, that's been the way it was. I mean, like, the Luddites, right? Being a Luddite is being an anti-technologist, and the term comes from um, a movement of people who would burn down cotton mill factories, right, where
Yeah.
they were they were the mill. I don't remember if it's a mill, but machines could make cloth, so you didn't have to do it by hand,
Yeah.
and so they were burning them down to so it's not a new phenomena. Um, I forgot where I was going with all of this, but yeah, but no. Oh, right. My point was, you mentioned this lack of human interaction. It's a negative spiral, right? Because if I only communicate with you online, all of the social cues, all of the
Seeing people's
emotional
faces and
IQ, all of the EQ,
yeah.
right? That is necessary for me to have a conversation with you, being able to read your facial speech features, knowing when it's your turn to speak, knowing when it's my turn to speak. All of those very um, fine abilities, you don't practice them when you're online, which means when you then go out into the world,
Yeah.
if you spend a lot of time online, you don't know how to interact in that kind of a scenario. So you go back to what you're comfortable with, which is online.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a negative spiral where you become where you meet people outside of the internet less and less and less because you're less and less familiar with the social cues and the body language and all of these things. And so you potentially can end up, again, if we're talking slippery slope and worst case scenario, is people who are so uncomfortable and unaware of how to interact with other people face to face
Yeah.
that they only do it online.
Yeah.
And you could say, oh, that's fine, who cares, they're still interacting with people. But I think the thing is, intimacy is painful to a certain extent, but once you push through that barrier, um, it's much more rewarding. So you're losing out on something that can be enormously beneficial because it's uncomfortable. And this is what I speaking of what I said earlier, right? Is the social media conglomerates, they've sold us a lie. They've sold us a lie that online communication is just as good as real life communication is, and it's not.
It
It's
comes
much more
nowhere
comfortable.
near as close.
It's much more comfortable, but it's much less enriching.
Yeah, exactly.
It feeds the soul less.
Yeah, exactly. It's so vital for people to have that human interaction, and I just like kids nowadays growing up like now, like my nieces and nephew, they're getting iPhones for the birthdays, right?
Mhm.
Like they're in a really well off position, so they're lucky. But they get
Yeah,
iPhones, they get these tablets, they communicate with their friends primarily, especially now during the isolation
yeah.
with friends online and so on. They don't. I'm telling you, they don't stand a chance. In the future, they don't stand a chance. It's going to be all like interfaces, communication via texts and like these made up worlds, virtual reality and so on. It's
I saw this. I saw this article. I was on the train, and in Denmark, the trains have free magazine or have a free magazine, and I was just kind of bored and looking through it. And so it was pre-COVID, so I didn't have to worry about Carano on the magazine, and I could look at it no problem. And it had on one page, it had this roadmap, and it was essentially a plan. It was essentially showing how the real world, or whatever you want to call it, the physical world, flesh and bones, would become integrated with the online world. And they said that like and so they were predicting the future. They said in year 2070, a person will mourn the death of their online avatar just as much as we today mourn the death of our actual child, if you are unfortunate enough to suffer that horrible event that your child dies. People would in the future, this author or this in this magazine was predicting that if you played a game, right, Farmville or whatever you want, and something died in that game or in that online sphere, on that online world, it would cause you as much emotional distress as if something died in the real world. And maybe and kids who are born nowadays, it's their new normal, right? They don't think about it as problematic, and the reason we think about it as problematic is because we're not ingrained it in the same way.
yeah,
But
we
I
saw
don't
the
think it's positive.
transition.
Yeah, but I can't see how it's a good thing. I honestly can't see how it's a good thing.
I understand why you take that view. I do think that if you set out on social media to use it the best way you can use it, to
mm,
if you have something on your mind or on your heart and you want to for it to reach out to people, I think you can influence people in that way, in a really positive good way, and add something valuable to other people's lives. But I see all the negative sides. I think it does have its uses. I just think, as you said before, we have to be careful thinking that social media is something other than what it is. Like
Yeah.
be careful thinking that it's supposed to replace your social interactions, because that's when you get messed up from it.
Yeah, I would say, don't take social media too seriously, right? Because if it is a platform to spread goodwill, I have no issue with it. But if you begin to take it so seriously that it's causing you is making you physically unwell and
Unplug.
giving you anxiety, then it serves no purpose.
Yeah.
If it's a playful toy, who cares?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's that anymore.
Suddenly, for a lot of people, it became something different. For sure.
Yeah.
I think we should round it off because we've hit the 1 hour and 30 minute mark, and we try to keep it under, mostly for the sake of Victor. He's a busy man, and he needs to move on. I see a couple of people joining, but you came just at the very end of the live stream. To round off, I think we talked about all of the things relating to this whole Gina Carano issue, and I don't think we agree on everything, and I think that's completely fine. I think it's important you have conversations with people you don't agree with to kind of to get your own opinions challenged, find out where you stand. Often people are afraid of having counterpoints to your arguments, but I find that it kind of weeds out the bad ones, the opinions you have that are not well founded, and the other ones are kind of reinforced when you talk about them with other people. So as always, I appreciate your input into the conversation and into the channel, the time you spent as well with me and with the people watching.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Thank you to you guys for commenting, especially to Shay for staying with us for so long and commenting all the way through. Scott Webb as well, and a few other people. Have a good weekend, guys. Enjoy the rest of today and Sunday tomorrow, and have a really good week next week. I'll be back with obviously with more videos, so check back in the channel during next week as well. Take care, guys.